So thanks, it's great to see people out here and interested in having public discussion about the G20 and the fallout. I wanted to start just with an example of this issue very much not being over. It wasn't just an isolated weekend in June in Toronto. This is an ongoing issue that is of concern to us right across the country. This might be one case where Toronto would agree that what happened there, should be of it's not just what happens in Toronto doesn't just matter in their city. That we all have to really take an interest and take action to prevent that kind of model from spreading and that kind of repression from spreading. I don't know why I felt the need to say something anti-Toronto right off the top. That's probably not good form. So I'm just getting warmed up here today. So there was an important public meeting that happened in Toronto at Ryerson University campus about 2 weeks ago, and it was a public forum just like this, a little bigger at the university, and it involved people like Judy Rebick, who had, I think, hosted the event through her university chair. And it was basically 5 or 6 of the different activists who had been involved in the G20 talking about the police repression and the ongoing issues, and just debating and talking about the results of the protests. And right after the meeting ended, one of the panelists who had spoken at the forum went home. His name was Alex Hundert. And when he got home that evening, the police were there to arrest him for speaking at the public meeting. Or I should say arrest him again. Alex was first arrested in the wee hours of the Saturday, June 26th in Toronto. Police used a battering ram to break into his apartment where he was staying with his partner and a friend, and arrested him at gunpoint. This is about at 4 in the morning on the Saturday. Alex and Leah Henderson, his partner, and many others spent several weeks in jail, and they were only given bail once they were able to secure the $100,000 sureties that were required. So their bail was set at $100,000. These are political activists arrested for their activities in the lead up to the G20. And so when Alex posted his bail, he was also given conditions that he was not allowed to participate in public protest. He wasn't allowed to participate in public protest. And what happened was he gave some telephone interviews with the media to discuss his arrest and his conditions, not his specific charges. And the police then phoned Alex a few days later and said, "You're at risk of violating your bail. We can arrest you again if you keep talking to the media." So all of a sudden, talking to the media becomes participating in a public protest. And then, a couple weeks ago, the reason given for Alex's rearrest again, or the reason given for his rearrest was the fact that he had spoken at a public meeting at a university, sponsored by a university chair, a very calm public forum, and this was the reason given for Alex's arrest. So we see a very, very dangerous creeping authoritarianism happening when speaking at a public meeting or even giving comments to the media becomes public protest. So we're in a very, very dangerous time right now, and there are over a dozen people facing very serious charges still coming out of the events of the G20. So the reason it's important we keep having discussions like this is because on the other side of the country, people are getting arrested, literally, for talking in public forums. So all of this goes back to June, and I guess really Vancouver did our part here around the Olympics with the ridiculous security budget that the government came up with. And we saw a similar thing in the lead up to the Olympics with harassment of activists, visits to people who had written books and articles critical of the Olympic Games were visited at their homes, their friends were visited at work. So yeah, we did do our part here in Vancouver, so we can be proud that the Vancouver police and the provincial government and the other authorities here did their part in starting to encroach on democratic rights in this country. But in Toronto, they really went over the top. They really outdid us. And yeah, when I got out there, I got a taste of it. So I'll just give a few anecdotes of what I saw when I was in Toronto. So I went there a few days before the main weekend of G20 meetings. I was participating in some anti-war forums and other events related to the G20 in the week leading up. So the first night I got there was Monday night before the protests. And there was a forum at a little cafe in the annex on the topic of foreign policy. And actually, Hadani was one of the speakers at that forum. We had her Skyping in to participate in the meeting. It was about Palestine and Afghanistan and their relationship to the G20. And Iraq, yes, exactly.
And about occupation.
Military occupation and Canadian foreign policy and how that tied into the G20. So I won't give you the details of that forum, but I just wanted to say that while we were having the forum inside, at one point the host, the manager of the space there, Beit Zatoun, the manager noticed that there were some police peeking in the windows. Police officers were peeking in the windows, and he thought this was not cool. So he went out and he asked the police, there was about half a dozen of them, he said, "Hey guys, what are you doing? We're having a forum." And the cops responded to him, "We heard there were protesters inside. Are there any protesters in there?" And the manager, the host of the space, he literally said to the police, he's like, "I don't know how to answer that question. We're having a public forum, maybe they will be protesters on the weekend. Maybe they, it was almost like, are you now or have you ever been a protester?" But this was the mentality that the police were working under and had been sort of sent down to them from their higher ups. And it just showed the real chill on democracy and discussion that was already setting in that week. And by the weekend, they were just rounding people up almost at random. Well, at times they were just rounding people up at random. Other times they started rounding people up based on ethnicity. They were definitely targeting French Canadians, Quebecois who were in Toronto, targeting young people, targeting, kids hanging out with backpacks. Everybody was getting rounded up by the end of the weekend. So that's how it started on Monday night. On Thursday and Friday, there were large demonstrations of thousands of people in the streets. Sort of just run-of-the-mill, peaceful protests, marching around with signs and banners. But I had never seen such an over-the-top police presence, even at these rallies and marches that happened. And a lot of it really was, and I think a lot of the purpose of the security budget, which was over $1 billion, was just to equip and arm the police with new toys and new instruments of repression. Because, you get your toys for the G20 weekend, but you don't have to give your toys back. You don't have to sell them. They're not rentals, right? So one of the things was that the police, you see bike police here when you see them, they're kind of the friendliest police you see. I mean, they're on bikes, they're pretty cool, and often they send out bike police for protests here, and it's a little different. They're sometimes hostile, but what we saw in Toronto was really a step up. Every bike cop, and there were literally hundreds lining the street on both sides when we did these marches on the week, Thursday and Friday. And every bike cop had a riot helmet in their rat trap, and all the spray and the extra guns, and was all on side bags on the bike. So these bike cops, every one of them was able to turn into a riot cop, as needed. So it was intimidating and excessive, and there was also a lot of riot police lining the streets, a lot of police on horses, and a lot of empty buses. All around downtown Toronto. And so it was clear to me by Thursday or Friday, seeing the number of police, the number of empty buses, and knowing that they had converted this studio into a temporary jail, it was very clear that there were going to be mass arrests, that the police had every intention of doing mass roundups. And what ended up happening, by the end of Sunday, it was in fact the largest mass arrest in Canadian history. Over 1,000 people were taken in. And including a photographer from the National Post, I believe, several reporters from the main television stations, City TV, CTV, a CTV producer was arrested, so a number of members of the mainstream media were arrested just trying to cover what was going on, and that gives you a taste of what was happening.